Okay, welcome to the week two go-to session. This is the second? Yeah, of course, week two of four sessions we're holding this month. Thanks so much for the people who are here. I've tried to fix the chat room or chat window problem, and it's still not functioning. So you are able to ask questions, make comments during the session. I'll just read them out loud to indicate that someone has said something. But yeah, you won't be able to, unfortunately, to see each other's comments. It's not a big deal for those who watch the archive video because they don't see the control panel or the chat window anyway. But for the five or so of us who are here, just try to be patient and keep that in mind, okay? All right, let's go ahead and get started. I do want to cover a little bit of what you read this week. This week you had what? I think about five chapters to read out of Slidology. They were a little bit awkwardly assigned. What did you guys have to read? It was like chapters 10, 1, 2, 3, and 4 or something like that. Um, it's a little bit disappointing because we'll get into issues of we'll just touch on them really briefly, issues of graphic design and visual design, but it's actually chapter 6 of Slidology that might have the most useful information. Not that the stuff you read for today isn't useful, but chapter 6 really gets into like the nuts and bolts about using colors, arranging elements on the page. And if you're not very familiar with this kind of stuff, that chapter would be incredibly useful. So you're absolutely allowed to read ahead, start looking at chapter 6 if you already know that visual design and graphic design are not your strengths. Um, Let me just say in advance that I'm not really grading you very harshly on these elements. I realize that not everybody has a strong background in graphic design. I certainly don't. I've learned a little bit since I've been putting together presentations for a couple of years now, but still, I have no training in graphic design. And I forget which one of your chapters you read it in. I can't remember if it's in Resonate or Slidology, or if it comes up in a future reading. But Nancy Duarte shares a fact that something like I forget, 90% of people don't have a strong graphic design background. So you're not alone. But recognize that one of the issues why we see so many poor presentations, remember we talked about this a little bit in the week one presentation, uh, because people don't have a strong sense of visuals. That's one of the reasons why they rely on really bad technique. For example, just throwing words on slides or putting bullet points on slides or creating slides that are a little more than cue cards for the presenter, right? Things that aren't tremendously interesting for the audience. They're actually more helpful for the presenter. Sometimes those things come about because people just don't have the confidence or strength to um, use simple and effective visuals and then let their speaking drive the presentation. And this is something I'm going to repeat ad nauseum week to week, just to remind people of that. But today we're going to begin with just a quick overview of some of the points that were made in Slidology. Again, because these were assigned readings, I'm not going to cover every detail. That's really boring. But it does give a sort of recap of what you've read. Again, hopefully you're keeping up with the readings. I don't think any of the readings are tremendously long. You can certainly read at the level of gist and get through the readings pretty quickly. And because Resonate and Slidology are both written by the same author, they echo one another. So just the sheer repetition of going through those chapters should hopefully make some of those ideas stick. So we'll begin with one, which is the 5 theses of what makes the power of a presentation. Okay, so I begin with a question like, what gets you inspired? And I mean that like literally. Like, what are the things that get you excited? Maybe it's film. Maybe it's drawing. Maybe it's music. Maybe it's books. Maybe it's video games, right? A lot of the stuff you come here to study. Um, my passions, for example, are music. Okay, I'm not a professional musician, but I took piano lessons as a kid. I still play to this day. Film, I've taught introduction to film at another university. It's kind of a passion of mine. The sheer amount of popular music and films that I watch is ridiculous. But draw upon whatever it is that excites you or motivates you. There are ways to sort of fold those elements into your presentation. When we get closer to the time where you actually have to start drafting your presentation, you're going to begin kind of this week, but it's mostly going to be in just textual form. But when we get into week 3 and week 4 and you actually start putting your presentation together, some people really have strong skills with like video editing software, so they can draw upon their experience with film, or they're able to communicate their passion for music through their presentation. So draw upon whatever inspires you. People who use or people who love video games and can find a really unique way to almost use a video game like theme as their presentation driver. There are copyright issues you have to be careful about, but all those things, the things that excite you can also be what makes your audience excited as they watch your presentation. Going back to week one, you have to be careful. Okay. The presentation isn't all about you. It's about your audience's needs. But there's a middle ground there where hopefully some sort of shared values can come across, and using the things that drive you can get your audience interested and excited. Because it's really this matter of getting others inspired that's the big question here, right? I mean, as I said last week, what we're working towards is a 3 to 4 minute presentation where you will imagine yourself 2 years in the future. Okay, so you're a recent Full Sail grad. Brandon is saying the audio just disappeared for him. Can other people hear me? Okay, Justin is saying yes. Brandon, can you hear me now? I'm going to type to Brandon in the chat. This will be incredibly boring for people who watch it after the fact. But Brandon, you might have to log in again if you are having audio problems. Send. Sometimes the audio can get a little bit wonky for people, and if that happens, sometimes the simplest fix is just to exit the room and come back in again. Or reboot the machine. That's my universal solution to everything sometimes. Just boot it all up again. Where was I? Oh, yeah. How do you get others inspired? Okay, because that's the real question. People are coming not to see you. Okay, remember this concept we learned about in week one, that the audience is king? The audience isn't really coming to see you. They are in part, but what they're really coming to hear is what you can do for them. And again, you're working toward a short presentation where you imagine yourself as a recent Full Sail grad, and you'll essentially be presenting yourself to that employer. So that means really putting yourself in your audience's shoes, okay? I mean, you can have all the razzle-dazzle in your presentation. You can come, in like gangbusters. With slick lingo and pyrotechnics, but is that what your audience really, really wants to see? Probably not. This is why I said, draw upon your passions, but be careful. You might love heavy metal music, but maybe heavy metal music isn't the right sort of sounds to be playing in the background of your presentation, because it might be distracting, or it might annoy your audience, because your audience comes first, right? This concept that Nancy Duarte talks about, your audience is king. You're ultimately there for them. And if I could share just a quick story, I like to think of teaching as basically a form of presentation. Okay, I've taught in the traditional classroom here at Full Sail. I've certainly taught in the traditional classroom plenty of times at other places, and I've always viewed it as an opportunity to sort of step out on stage. Okay, it doesn't mean that I'm not being myself. It doesn't mean that I'm being insincere or putting on an act. No. But I do become, I'd say, a more enhanced version of who I truly am. And in that sense, yes, you have to take that deep breath, walk out on stage, and deliver the goods. And by the way, there are certain things I'll do. I'll sometimes use little snippets of humor, or I might share a short anecdote, even if it's off topic, because I realize that in order to keep students' attentions, I sort of need to get away from the monotony of just lecturing. But I never make it about me. Okay, like I'm not the star. Yes, I'm comfortable in my own skin. Yes, I view it as a sort of performance, but my primary needs go to my audience and what they need to learn. If I can bring a little bit of my personality to bear, great. If I can find innovative ways or attention-grabbing ways to keep people, paying attention, great. But it's not all about me. Okay. How can you connect with your audience? One way is to figure out what their needs are. I think I mentioned this in last week's session as well, but the biggest piece of advice I give to people, not just when it comes to writing presentations, but in any sort of communication situation, so writing an essay, speaking to someone face to face, is to really be able to put yourself in that other person's shoes. Hasn't it happened to people? Have you ever had like an awkward phone conversation, or someone's telling you a story face to face, what they did last weekend, and you have to say, wait, but back up. I don't understand what you just said. Because the person understands things completely. When she says, oh, this happened and that happened, like it makes complete sense to her, but to you, it's a mystery. It's a little bit hard to describe, but surely you've been in these situations. You see it, you hear it all the time on like radio call-in shows. You get that really bad caller who just seems to make absolutely no sense, and then the host has to slow things down and try to figure out what the person is saying. And yeah, you feel bad for the person because it must be they must be nervous or they must feel awkward. But sometimes it's just a matter of they're not really putting themselves in the other person's shoes. They're not making their ideas understandable to their audience. So if you can put yourself in your audience's shoes, you can spot a bunch of these problems before they occur. And here it's super important, right? Because if you're imagining yourself speaking to a prospective employer, you really need to be putting yourself in their shoes. Like, what are the sorts of things they want to hear? They probably want to hear about your skills, your accomplishments. They probably want a sense of who you are. But to what degree will you share who you are? For example, it might be pertinent to know that you grew up in such and such place and you fell in love with hip hop music. I don't know, in Atlanta when the Atlanta scene was exploding in the 1990s, for example. Remember Ludacris and the Ying Yang Twins, and who else am I forgetting? Um, I'll move forward. I'm not displaying great presentation skills right now, but maybe some of that background information is useful and pertinent. But if you start getting into, I don't know, you grew up on a farm and your dad left you when you were 3, and then you had to work the tractor, like that might be too much information. So being able to put yourself in your audience's shoes can help you decide what sorts of information do they really want to know about. And again, you have 3 to 4 minutes, which for some people seems interminable. Like they have about a minute worth of material and they can't figure out how to fill 3 or 4 minutes. And for other people, it feels too short. They have 10 minutes worth of material and they need to edit it down. So putting yourself in your audience's shoes can help with all of that. Okay, and just some reminders here. Okay, where we're ultimately trying to move people. They're not coming to see us; they're coming to understand what we can do for them. Even the TED Talks are examples of this, right? I mean, hopefully, you guys saw some talks that were pretty impressive. I still have to get through your write-ups, but I'm hoping that because you had 3 TED Talks to look at, maybe 1 or 2 of them were pretty skillful. Notice in the case that even though they're pretty much all professional presenters and very skilled and very talented, they're not making it about themselves, right? They're trying to move people, but the ultimate exchange that's happening is a sort of gift giving from the speaker to the audience. Okay, but the speaker isn't the star. Okay, there's another pretty picture. And notice, too, what I'm doing here. Again, I'm trying to demonstrate the principles of presentation making, even in these go-to sessions. I mean, true, your ultimate presentation will be scripted. It will be professional, whereas I'm not exactly winging it. I've given these sessions month after month, and I pretty much know what to cover, but I'm not delivering it from a script, right? I don't have a piece of paper in my hand right now that I'm reading off of. But notice, like, what do my slides feature? You typically a pretty interesting or powerful visual, limited text, and this is completely the opposite of what Again, I'm going to repeat it ad nauseum week after week. So you're really going to want to club me by the end of the month. But yeah, I'm not just throwing words on a page. Okay, I'm not using slides like cue cards, or the opposite. If they're not cue cards for the presenter, how do slides function? Sort of like handout material, like stuff you could have just read on your own. There was no need for a presenter because it's all on the slides. That's not effective presentation making. Again, simple but powerful visuals, useful text, and then your presentation is what drives things. And again, the TED Talks are pretty good examples of that, right? I mean, I'm just going to go out on a limb here. I'm guessing that none of the TED Talks you watched, did any of your presenters just deliver like a really static PowerPoint presentation? Did any of your presenters just stand up there and use their laser pointer to point at words on a slide? I doubt it. Yeah, Justin says no. I haven't watched every TED Talk because there are like literally thousands of them, but they're pretty skilled people. They're not creating quite the presentation you'll create. As I've said to some people already, I've started responding to your discussion board activity from last week. There are lots of comments about anxiety and how public speaking creates anxiety. And I think I wrote to several people to remind them, presentations in this class are much different because they're not going to occur in real time. You're not going to step out in front of a live audience. You don't even need to appear on camera. Most students don't. Okay, most students do exactly what I'm doing now. I don't appear on camera. Believe me, you don't. You don't want to see me. Um, right? I mean, I'm basically using visuals, simple text, and then I'm delivering what it is that I need to deliver. Okay. Brandon says there was one presenter who just listed facts. Okay, so that it sounds like if I'm reading between the lines, that wasn't a terrific presentation. By the way, that's useful too. If anybody came across a TED Talk presentation that wasn't very effective, I think we can often learn from what's not effective, right? We want to sort of borrow ideas that work, but ignore the ones that don't. And with the TED Talks, it's additionally challenging because you're not really working toward that type of presentation, but still the various techniques they used. I'm sure some of your presenters might have told stories, right? Maybe a personal story, a personal anecdote. Some of your presenters might have made comparisons or metaphors. They might have drawn on examples from history. They might have used humor. They might have used some sort of attention grabbing move, not to make themselves the stars, like a a narcissist, but no, like something that really was useful and grabbed your attention, so that you were kind of glued in to what else the presenter had to say. Justin says, I had one that hung there here and there too, but she was able to offset the technical info pretty well. Okay, good. But the real thing here is to sort of learn more from the techniques, storytelling, anecdotes, quotations, metaphors, thoughtful questions. We can use a variety of techniques when we deliver information. That's really I think the takeaways here. Okay, real quickly, because this connects more with slideology, this idea of imagery versus content, okay? And it's a good way to think of presentations as it's sort of roughly those two elements. There's a visual element, and then there's your actual content, which is what you're speaking, okay? And here's just, oops, I went too fast. Just a real quick, what happened to my smiley faces? There we go. This is just a graphic representation of something that I think a lot of you know about, which is to be careful not to go too crazy with visuals, right? We want something that's sort of orderly and peaceful and useful, something that's not chaotic like what we have here on the left. Although, oddly, in this case, it is an effective visual because it's displaying sort of chaos. This is sort of modern art picture here. Okay. And again, use common sense. You guys browse the web all the time. You've seen disaster websites, right, with annoying animations that just blink on and off, or pop-up videos, or motion that's just distracting and not at all useful. I've never understood those techniques, to be honest. I understand there's an argument for them because as you annoyingly try to click something off, you might actually accidentally click it. It takes you to the site that it wants you to go to. But does anybody ever go to those sites and want to stay there? It just gets you angry. You don't want to get your audience angry either by distracting visuals. So again, simple visuals that are powerful, like in this next image here, right? Because we're trying to cultivate healthy relationships. And even if we just linger on the slide, I could have chosen a much more commonplace image, right? I could have gone to a Creative Commons image site. Those are the sorts of sites where you can use images in projects if you give credit for them. And I could have found, I don't know, two people shaking hands or something kind of corny like that. But I like this image here of the rainbow, bringing a sort of shot of light into an otherwise flat and dry landscape. Okay. Again, I'm trying to put forward these principles myself. Simple visuals, powerful text, and then let my presentation drive things forward. Now, does this mean you can never have text on slides? Of course not. Sometimes it's useful. Does it mean you can never have a bulleted list? Of course not. But that's not the only thing we're doing, because that's not really presentation making. That's just filling slides with clutter. That's not really leading to a public speaking delivery. And in your future Full Sail classes, because Full Sail tries to have some continuity from class to class, this won't be the first time you'll have to create a presentation. So some of these really basic concepts, get them under control now. And by the way, there's something freeing about this. I used to be a bad presentation maker. I can remember 15 years ago, PowerPoint, open it up, put words on there, create bullet points. right? And sometimes they were so dull, I didn't even pick a design. It was just literally a white slide with like text on the, and oh, I apologize so badly for those students 15 years ago. There's something freeing and actually even gorgeously simple about finding the right image. Pairing it with the right text and then using that to sort of drive what you have to deliver rather than the other way around, which is you just cluttering slides with information that you could have either handed out to people so they could read it on their own, or like I said, that are just functioning as cue cards for you to read off of. Okay, let's speed things up. Some quick comments about what's called the presentation ecosystem. Okay, so if we think of presentations, I said it's useful to look at it in two parts, right? There's a visual element or half, and then there's your actual delivery, your public speaking, your presentation. But you can actually think of it in threes as well. Okay, there's your message. Which is the information you need to deliver. And this means issues of audience, who you're speaking to, and are you meeting their needs, coming up with ideas. Okay. Again, there are I think, some sort of common sense things you'll probably need to include in your presentation, like your skills, your accomplishments, but you certainly have different ideas about how to communicate that. It will require some writing. Again, whether you could deliver the information in a memo or an essay or a presentation, okay, but it's going to involve writing, and there's an element of critique that you should be able to look over what you've come up with and make adjustments, make changes, come up with new ideas possibly. Then there's the visual element, which we've been talking about. Okay, so all sorts of visual thinking. Graphic design, how we put elements on the page. The good news is if you use a tool like PowerPoint or Keynote, this presentation is delivered in Keynote, which is Mac's sort of presentation software. If you've never used these presentation tools in the past, you should try it out. And when you do, you'll notice that lines sometimes appear when you start dragging in images or dragging in any elements. And those are guiding lines. Okay, so the programs will help you a little bit with issues of graphic design. So you're not just dropping elements randomly, but you are actually placing them somewhat carefully. Visuals can also include motion design. Some students use this, a lot don't. It depends how comfortable you are with technology. Certainly, we have a range of students, some who are super comfortable with technology. To be honest, some of them are much stronger than I am. But then we have some people who are brand new to technology. So motion design is not a requirement, but it's a possibility, even if it's simple things like transitions from one slide to another. And then there's your delivery, okay? How you actually deliver your message. This is a more human-based thing. For example, I'm delivering information right now by talking. But it also includes other things like, what tools you're going to use to deliver it, putting your ideas on paper. And as you can see, critique is common to all three of these areas. Okay, so just some quick comments about message. First of all, coming up with ideas. Hopefully most of you are comfortable with brainstorming. Maybe you've had to brainstorm for a paper. If you're an artsy person to begin with, you're probably very familiar with brainstorming. There are all different sorts of techniques, everything from free writing to using more visual-based ideas like clustering, which is sort of like drawing circles and then putting ideas in those circles and connecting them to other ideas. But it is important to start thinking about your presentation. How are you going to use those 3 to 4 minutes most effectively? One concept that Nancy Duarte loves is the idea of sticky notes. She loves sticky notes because you can write on them, you can move them around. If you like them, use them. There are even electronic versions of sticky notes, right? You can sticky up your desktop with virtual sticky notes. If you like that strategy, go ahead and use it. If you're used to other forms that you've used in the past, do so. So if your background is in film, you might think of things almost like a script. Okay. You don't literally have to have like a scene 3 and then this person speaking. But you should all be scripting what you'll ultimately deliver. I do have some concerns because every month I do see, 5 to 7 people who are just sort of winging it. They just click record and they start speaking away, and there's lots of ums and uhs and stumbles and awkward pauses and awkward information that was better left on the cutting room floor. All of this can be avoided by scripting. And in future weeks, we're going to talk a little bit more about storytelling, that sharing short personal anecdotes, like I've done a couple times in this session, sharing my story of how I used to create bad presentations, or sharing the example of how when I teach, when I walk into a traditional classroom, it's like walking out on stage. Okay, storytelling can be an effective technique. It's certainly one you can draw upon in your presentation, and I'm sure your TED Talk presenters made use of that. There's also a visual story to tell. Okay. Week one, we talked about how you're essentially taking your audience on a 3 to 4 minute journey. That journey can be straightforward and fact driven, but that's probably not terribly interesting. If we're varying our techniques, again, drawing on short anecdotes or quotations or thoughtful questions or metaphors or anecdotes from history, those can liven things up. But again, for those of you who are here to study computer animation or video game design, storyboarding is a good technique to use, especially since storyboarding forces you to think about what's going to be on the screen along with a description of what's going to accompany that. Okay, that's really similar to what presentation software does. As a matter of fact, in any program that you use, so PowerPoint, Keynote, Prezi, you do have like a note function. So if you want to have an actual script or notes, you can do so. So storyboarding is a great technique. And here's an example, sort of like clustering, right? The idea of putting ideas in circles and then connecting them to other ideas. We're going to start talking about how this week's assignment, I want to see you start planning your 3 to 4 minute presentation. I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But you'll have to choose a sort of brainstorming technique that works well for you. You don't have to hand in your brainstorming technique, but you should hopefully be thinking about possibilities. Just some real quick images of powerful visual thinking, right? Both of these images are powerful. They're here in this slide just to represent what powerful images can do, but either of these images on the left or right, I could use in a full slide to communicate an idea. Same thing here. Although the one on the right here probably wouldn't work very well in a slide because I'm not sure where I would put the text. Okay. And just a quick reminder that visual elements also include issues of graphic design. So we just have some pretty pictures of graphic design. Again, if it's graphic design isn't one of your strengths, don't worry too much. Slideology will help a lot. If not, it's just, again, I don't grade that harshly on these areas. I understand it's not everybody's strength. I just want to see you wrestle with these ideas, marrying images with text, for example, or if you're more comfortable with more sophisticated techniques, doing that. Some of you might use motion design. And when we get to like week 3, I do have a couple past student examples to share so you can get a sense of what a few other students' 3 to 4 minute presentations look like. I know it's a little bit difficult in this class because, the assignment sheets can sometimes feel a little bit open-ended. That's on purpose. But sometimes students can feel a little bit lost, like, I have to create a 3 to 4 minute presentation, but what possibly could that include? So I'll share some examples of what past students have done. Okay, some real quick comments about delivery, and then we're going to get into this week's activities, okay, what you need to do for this week and what you need to do well. Okay, delivery. Again, just a reminder, you're a human being, so the presentation software is not the star. You are, okay? Presentation software helps make you a more powerful presenter. Again, that's why the sort of, I don't want to say lazy because that sounds like an accusatory sort of term. But yeah, I mean, the presentations that aren't effective, the ones that just are words on a slide, they're not terribly interesting, but they're also not terribly human because what does it do? It forces the audience to be in lockstep with, this person is just going to read what's on the slide, or what's on the slide could have just been given to me to read on my own time. I'm not sure why I'm sitting here listening to this. So yeah, I mean, there's a human element. Okay, I want to be careful because yes, your audience is the focus, not you, but you're important too. Okay, you're sort of the vehicle for delivery here, and you have a very, very important role to play, and you need to embrace it. Again, just a reminder what kind of tools you're going to use. A lot of you will use pretty standard tools. I get a lot of PowerPoint. That's fine. That's awesome. Some people use Prezi. Do you all know Prezi? It's online presentation software. I can't remember if I said it last week. It kind of mimics 3D effects. It's not literally 3D. It's like 2.5D. It's a really fun tool, but I think it's a difficult tool to use well. But yeah, lots of people choose standard presentation software, but other people are very comfortable using video software. In week 4, I'll have, before you're handing your final project, I'll have a whole list of tips and tricks. And I'll even show how video editing software could be used really, really powerfully to create a presentation. So you don't have to limit yourself to things like PowerPoint. But if you do, that's fine too. Again, I'm using standard presentation software right now. You're more than welcome to do it. And as long as you can match, effective imagery with an effective, prepared, scripted, and delivered speech, you should be fine. Okay, so it's not terribly difficult. Just a reminder that you do need to critique what you do. I kind of blew by that slide kind of quickly. Right, critiquing is a really powerful tool to be able to look at what you've done and spot what's not working, what's not meeting your audience's needs. In general, just what can be improved. It's a skill that, you get better at it over time, but it's a skill that everybody has intuitively. You should be able to look at your work and be able to see how it could be improved. Well, actually, we've talked about brainstorming, so let's kind of move on. Now we're going to get into kind of this week's assignments. Actually, let me get away from this slide for a second because it actually relates to the assignment. So let's switch to the assignment sheet. Let me close some of these windows. We'll get back to this guy later. That's my favorite image from your Resonate textbook. Okay, where's the assignment sheet? Well, that's one of them, but that's not the one I wanted to start with. Here we go. Okay. Your assignment this week is to plan your presentation. Now, do I have that activity open? Yes. Okay. So you have these tools. Okay, the instructions, the grading rubric. You also have this other. Let me make it a little bit larger. You also have this final document here, which is called Final Assignment Instructions. And it's literally what it says. We're giving you the assignment sheet to the actual project that we're working toward, right? Because how do you plan a 3 to 4 minute presentation if you don't know the specifics of the assignment for that 3 to 4 minute presentation? So you have the final assignment sheet available to you, which is probably where you should begin to look. Okay, and I have it open here. Again, you should be reading all assignment sheets on your own. I don't want to waste time in the session reading every word, so I'm just going to skip the most important stuff. Okay, so for this assignment, 3 to 4 minute presentation where you pitch yourself to prospective employers as a recent graduate of Full Sail. In other words, you will be sharing your personal brand with your audience. We'll talk about personal branding in just a moment. Employers generally want to know what you have done. So as you project yourself into the future, use concrete examples of things you are planning, hoping to do in the next 2 years at Full Sail. So you're allowed to invent a little bit. Don't go crazy. Don't imagine that you have the #1 song on the Billboard charts. Or last month, a female student was talking. She's a music production student, and her presentation mentioned how she had worked with Taylor Swift and Jay-Z and Beyonce. And I had to be the sort of mean instructor and say, this might be inventing a little bit too much, but you're certainly allowed to mention projects you can see yourself fulfilling over your next 2 years and mentioning them as if you've already accomplished them. The good news is not all Full Sail students, but a lot of you do have accomplishments already that you can mention. Okay, so these are things that you could cover in your presentation. To the right here, you have a list of thought questions. Okay. As it says here, to prepare for this assignment, research the following questions and make notes to help plan your presentation. For example, what is your target industry? What are a few interesting points about the industry? Why do you find them interesting? These are your questions, okay? These are questions that you might want to mull over as you consider, like, who's my audience? What might be interesting to them? What might they find interesting? Okay, but these are things that literally will not appear in your presentation. I want to make that clear because I still saw last month a handful of students, week 4, their presentation saying my target industry is X. Here's what's interesting. It's like, I don't need to know that. A prospective employer would never want to know that. This is information for you to think about so that you understand your audience and who you're ultimately speaking to as best you can. Okay. Same thing like this. What do you see as your next steps in the industry after graduation? Okay, probably that is something you would cover in your presentation. It would be tailored to your audience, but okay, that's a question that kind of crosses over as what quality skills does your industry look for? That's something that probably would show up in your presentation, but you wouldn't literally say, my industry, computer animation, is looking for the following. Your prospective employers would be computer animators, right? A computer animation company. It'd be really odd for them to sit there and listen to someone saying, my industry is computer animation. Here are the skills they value. So these are thought questions for you to consider. Okay, does that make sense? And on page 3, and I hate to critique it. I think I've told you that I'm primarily in the English department, but I teach creative presentation most months. I do wish that these assignment sheets were a little bit more compact and direct, because you sort of have to hunt and pick for for the valuable information. But on page 3, there's more useful stuff. So again, the reminder that you're going to create a unique feature representation of yourself. Okay. You will compose your presentation through the voice of that future self, looking back on what you've accomplished. And then some reminders, things you probably want to cover, like how are you unique? How will you excel? What knowledge or skills have you mastered during your time at Full Sail? What are your unique interests? Referencing your program courses. Imagine that you've, excuse me, I stumbled there. Referencing your program's courses. Imagine what you will have already done. Okay. Again, you can invent a little bit, but keep things reasonable. And then there are more reminders here. Okay. Make sure that you're using the concepts presented in your readings and the go-to sessions. You pick a tool that you're familiar with. Okay, so if you're not comfortable with video editing software, then maybe you shouldn't go there. PowerPoint is fine. There's nothing wrong with PowerPoint. Your goal is to use it effectively, but there's absolutely no problem with it. Okay, and some other reminders. So again, I'll let you read through this on your own. But that's what we're working toward for the end of the month. What you're doing this week is you're just coming up with a plan. Okay. The idea is we don't just open up the software, start plugging away, and when we're finished, hand it in and say, "There's my presentation." Right? The goal is to plan some things in advance. So this is the activity for this week, which is what 2.4. Okay, the 2.4 assignment. Where do I want to go here? Okay. After reading the chapters this week, you're going to create a presentation plan for your final project, which is that presentation. It gets a little confusing because you keep seeing these references to the brand yourself assignment. I'd like a better title for these assignments. But yeah, whenever you see the brand yourself assignment, that's what we're talking about. This 3 to 4 minute presentation where you project yourself into the future, speaking to prospective employers. And by the way, if you want to literally think of a specific employer, like you can see yourself working for Def Jam, that's fine. But it doesn't have to be specific. It could be like record labels in general, or computer animation companies in general. Okay, and there's the reminder. Pitching yourself a version of your future self to prospective employers, blah, 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 blah. But here's the kind of nitty gritty stuff. You basically have to take all this stuff here and answer it as thoroughly as possible. So who is your audience? Okay, what type of information is important to this particular group? What do you want this audience to do or think about after your presentation? And don't treat these questions generically. Try to really put yourself in your audience's shoes and think about what they would expect. Try to come up with a plan for your ideas. For example, you should probably have some sort of beginning, middle, and end. Okay, we talked about this in week 1. The presentations, like stories, have a beginning, middle, and end. Okay, and you can use whatever tool you want. You can create a map. You can use PowerPoint. Lots of people use Microsoft Word, so I literally get an outline that answers these questions. But if you're feeling more ambitious and want to use a visual tool, that's cool. Okay, I just need to know that I need to see that you have a plan for your essay, or excuse me, your presentation. Be sure to include important takeaway or a star moment. I'm going to define that in just a second. Okay. You can read through the rest of these on your own. What tools do you think you'll use, and why? Consider possible obstacles that you might face. Okay. So you're answering these questions, and in doing so, it gives me a sense of what your presentation is going to look like. Perhaps this might be the most important part because I do want a sense of what you're going to do to start things off, what you think will be the meat or heart of your presentation, and how you'll end things. And the more specific you can be about that, the better. You don't have to map things out slide by slide. If you want to, though, that's awesome. I would love to look at the, 10, 12, 15 slides along with notes that show what you're already thinking about. But if not, your main goal here is to basically answer these questions, in Microsoft Word, in PowerPoint, whatever you want. Does that make sense? That's the 2.4 activity. It's sort of to get your ideas on the page so that you have something, at least a loose blueprint to follow, so that when it comes to week 3 and you actually have to take your first attempt at creating the presentation, that you're not completely lost, that it's not your first time thinking it through, that you've already put ideas on paper. Okay. And now I'm going to return to the keynote, because here's where the relevant stuff comes into play. Um, this is a serious assignment. I want to see people putting forth their best efforts. On the other hand, it is low stakes in the sense that I'm not really going to be grading you harshly on, oh gosh, that's a terrible way to begin your presentation. How could you think of that? You're really going to begin your presentation with a knock knock joke? I mean, I'll probably say you might want to rethink that. But this is really a time to get your ideas on the page, okay? And we don't want to penalize too badly for that. So here's some quick rules that kind of apply to this assignment. First of all, postpone and withhold your judgment ideas. Okay, it's really difficult to get ideas on the page if that chorus in your own brain is already shouting them down. At this stage, it's okay to get ideas on the page. So rule number 2 follows that with the encouragement of wild, exaggerated ideas. That doesn't mean crazy ideas, and it doesn't mean ideas that wouldn't connect with your audience. But we don't want to limit creativity either. We don't want to limit the idea of great ideas. Okay. So at this stage, you can feel free to explore those if you want. Also, quantity counts at this stage, not quality. I'd much rather get the most detailed explanation of what you think your presentation will do rather than just generalities like, oh, I think I'll begin by grabbing my my audience's attention somehow. The middle of my presentation will be filled with facts. The end of my presentation will be a quote. Well, that doesn't tell me very much. Okay, so at this stage, I really want you to get as many ideas on paper as possible. It's not that quality isn't important, but I want you to brainstorm and really explore. Um, okay. You can also build on ideas put forth by others. This is why you've watched the TED Talks this week. And just a quick reminder that every idea and every person has equal worth. Okay. All of you have terrific things to say. And for me, the most valuable time is, come week 3, week 4, and I get to see your ideas. There are always amazing stories. Like last month, I never think that a student is down for the count, but one student truly felt lost. But wow, did he have like the biggest turnaround in maybe the history of the class? I mean, just an outstanding presentation. And actually, his presentation will be one of the ones that I share come week 3 or so, because it's just amazing to see like what he had been doing and then what he was capable of. So yeah, you all have great stuff to share. Can I just breeze through this stuff? Even I get tired of my own slides sometimes. Uh, okay. Well, what was this about? Oh yeah, connecting with audiences. We get this, right? We have different methods, different ways to connect with our audience. Memories, historical events, interests, thoughtful questions, metaphors. We have common goals with our audience, right? We're trying to lead them to something that yes, we want to share, but that's also useful for them. Okay. In other words, outcomes that are mutually desired, which is exactly what you're doing when you're an employee looking to join an employer. Okay, we've already covered this, qualifications. Okay, we already covered this as well. Be careful of visual vertigo. Okay, things that are distracting. Animations that are just either distracting or annoying or just purely decorative, right? Finding the right powerful image can be terrific as a visual anchor while you're delivering important information out loud, but the wrong visuals can distract. So just be sure to avoid those kinds of things. Why is this not moving forward? This also includes things like color theory. I actually have a link that I want to share. Where is it? Color Theory 101. I'm going to go ahead and copy this into the chat for people who find it useful. And for the people who are watching this after the fact, I'm just going to let things linger here for a moment. So you can maybe um, pause the video and jot down the URL. I'm going to go ahead and type it into the chat. This is a really awesome website about color theory. Um, what colors work together, what colors go together. Um, and I'm trying not to speak as I scroll because I've been told that I tend to cut out, the audio cuts out whenever I scroll. So I'm going to be silent as I scroll here. As we get farther down, we get examples. So like what red implies versus other colors. Okay, so it's really useful if you know nothing about colors to take a quick look at this site that I just posted into the chat. Okay, where was I? We're getting near the end, so hang in there. Okay, this week's assignment. We already talked about one of them. Okay, brand yourself. I said that we're working toward a 3 to 4 minute presentation, right? Where you're pitching your future self to prospective employers. It's often called the brand yourself assignment, which I think is a little bit confusing because the main goal this month isn't really so much an emphasis on branding as it is, um, creating that presentation to a prospective employer. But that touches on issues of branding. So I want to just real quickly talk about branding. We when we think about branding, we often think about things like corporate logos, right? So there's the Nike swoosh, the golden arches of McDonald's. Those are obviously elements of branding. They're visual logos that are part of a company's visual brand. But a brand is much more than that. It's on a couple of your assignment sheets, but there's a quote from Jeff. I never know how to pronounce his last name. Is it Bezos? The Amazon.com CEO. He has a really nice description of what branding is or what personal brand is all about. It's what people say about you when you're not in the room. So, for example, if we think about Brandon just shared another useful link for colors. I'm going to go ahead and copy that and paste it because nobody else can see it. Bear with me. There we go. What was I saying? Oh, okay. Celebrities. It gets a little bit annoying to talk about celebrities, but what better example to use than at least a figure that everybody knows? If I were to mention the word Taylor Swift, the name Taylor Swift, what are adjectives we could use to describe her? And be nice, okay? I'm not asking for you for your personal opinion about the woman. I'm saying being honest, given her image that's out there. Like, what words would we use to describe her? Any thoughts? By the way, this is an encouragement to use the chat. Justin says young. Okay. She probably doesn't have too much control over that. I mean, she's factually young, but yes, that's an adjective we'd use to describe her. But like thinking of like what people would say about her if she's not in the room, like what kind of adjectives would we use to describe her? So this is an encouragement to go ahead and type things in the chat, people other than Justin. I don't even know what Justin's. I'm so out of touch. What does XD mean? It looks like some sort of emoticon, but nobody can think of words to describe. Justin says old school. Okay, by that I think you mean traditional. Okay, I think that's fair. Traditional. Justin says traitor. See, let's try to just be factual about a thing. Like, if you don't like Taylor Swift, you could think of all sorts of negative, untalented. She can't sing. No, I'm just saying her brand. Like when you see the image of Taylor Swift, I would say yes, traditional, pure. Brandon says marketing genius. Okay, so business savvy, absolutely. Wholesome, Justin, good one. Manny says famous. Okay, that's factual. It's certainly an adjective that describes her. But yeah, the things that we would say about her when she's not in the room, things like wholesome, traditional, business savvy, right? These are adjectives, and she's not innocent. Okay, she knows that this is her brand. There's a reason, for example, she's very very careful with. If she spots a photo of her that's not being used the way that she likes, she is all over that photographer. You might have heard about how she recently took on Apple, right, to make sure that during the free trial period of their new music program, that artists still got paid. But yeah, we can use other terms to describe her, like traditional, wholesome, pure, innocent, maybe even naive, romantic. Okay. I mean, this is part of her brand, and it's no accident. I mean, she has a very, very conscious idea of who she is and how she wants her image to be put out there. Um, Brandon says she moved with what was pop at one time to another. She knew she's gone from country to pop, rock, and even rap. Yeah, I'm trying not to weigh in here because I'm actually a big Taylor Swift fan. I love everything she does. So I'm completely biased here. But like if we say Kanye West, can we come up with a different list of adjectives? And again, let's be nice because I know the guy gets his fair. And wow, I didn't even intend it, but there's a connection there too, right? Taylor Swift, Kanye West. Remember years ago, he burst on stage and interrupted her at the what was it, the MTV Music Awards. But what are words we could use to describe him? Okay, I would also say business savvy. I would say confident. Justin says cocky. Okay, that's another way to put it. I don't think that's necessarily a negative term though. Outspoken, right? Brash. And yeah, we could probably come up with negative adjectives. I don't think we have to limit ourselves to positives. But he has a specific brand as well. Okay, and again, I would argue that he probably knows what that is and wants that to be his brand. Brandon says Kanye tries his best to stay in the limelight by creating reasons for the media to pay attention to him. Yeah, I agree, but I think it's intentional. Even his famous Taylor Swift interruption years ago, like that's just him doing what he does. And you either love it or you hate it, but I don't think it's again. I don't think it's an accident. So anyway, what I have here on the screen is, you might go through this checklist for yourself. How would you describe yourself? Like, here's what adjectives I would use to describe me. Okay, serious, intelligent, funny, committed, compassionate, reserved. But it's also useful to kind of, and if you can ask real people, family, friends to do this, it's even better. If not, you can guesstimate. But how would others describe you? I think people would describe me as, again, serious and smart. As for funny, sometimes people don't see it that way. They think I'm too dry, too distant. So that doesn't always come across. Yeah, I think I come across as hardworking and kind. I see myself as reserved. Like I'm much more outgoing during, for example, these sessions or if I'm teaching a classroom. But when I'm not on stage in any form, like I just want to go to a cubicle, sit in my cubicle, or go home and sit on the couch and watch baseball on television, and not talk to anybody. Right? Don't want to be around a single person. So I see myself as a reserve, but others might see it as being distant or aloof. But the useful thing here, though, is if you can come up with a list how you would describe yourself, how others see you, you can maybe correct for things. Like maybe I would say, well, I don't want to be seen as distant as aloof. That's not part of my brand. It might be the truth, but I don't want that to be part of my brand. So I need to come across more like this. So if there's any sort of disconnect between these two sides, that can help you determine your brand. Your brand is basically how you carry yourself. It's what you communicate about yourself in everything that you do. So when we call this presentation the brand yourself assignment, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's not really, its main goal isn't to focus on branding. It's to present yourself in a unified professional way that communicates who you are. In other words, your brand hopefully should come across through your attention to the detail in your presentation. Does that make sense? And if you say no, I'm sorry because I can't I can't put it any better than that. I actually like the way I worded that. So, uh, where was I? Oh yeah, my favorite picture from the Nancy Duarte chapter one. This is not your personal brand. Okay, right? They give this picture of this doofus. I could use a harsher word to describe this picture. I do like the Nancy Duarte books because sometimes she makes kind of off the wall comparisons or has funny visuals. But like, this isn't a brand, or maybe it is, but I don't know. Is this really what you want your brand to be? So one thing I do want to remind people is that your brand is not mythologizing. Your brand is not imagining yourself as a wheeler dealer or the hottest thing to hit the scene. I mean, maybe you'll eventually become that, and if you do, that's awesome. Just try to remember me, and I don't know, put a quarter in my cup when you see me on the street. But at where you are now, this should not be Justin says Jersey Shore. Yeah, like this should not be your brand. And most students get this, but occasionally I do get students who forget about that, and they see the prospective presentation to a possible employer as this is my chance to show them how I am a star. And again, you're not the star. Okay, your audience is. So yeah, if your brand is this, you're probably sort of missing the whole point of presentation and branding. Again, later when if you actually become super successful and you're making millions, then yeah, you have every right to become this character if you want to be. I just don't think that's a very good choice right now. Okay, final thing two final things I need to mention. Uh, there's a question in your planning assignments, right? So your outline, your blueprint for what you think you'll do in your presentation that asks you to identify a star moment. Things are a little bit misplaced because you actually don't read about star moments until week 3, which is really awkward because your week 2 assignment is asking for it. So I'm just going to quickly explain what that is. STAR is an acronym that stands for something they'll always remember. And again, it gets much better when you can actually read the textbook chapter because it gives examples of this. For example, Bill Gates, who has devoted himself mostly to philanthropic causes now that he's no longer CEO of Microsoft. So he devotes himself to humanitarian causes. And in one speech, he walked out on stage, and this is mentioned in your textbook, with a jar of mosquitoes and just opened it. And his message was, because I think he was delivering a speech on malaria, that people who live in more comfortable parts of the world shouldn't be sheltered from these realities. And now, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think he released malaria infected mosquitoes. But the idea of coming on stage with mosquitoes in a jar and opening it—that's something you remember. Something a bit more tame that's also mentioned in your textbook is Steve Jobs showing off. I forget which product it was. Maybe the newest MacBook or the AirBook, but showing off how thin and light it was. He walked on stage with a manila envelope, the sort of ones that are kind of used for those like inner office memos, those 8x11 or 9x12 size envelopes, and just pulled the new machine right out of there. Okay, that's a pretty attention grabbing moment. Your star moment doesn't have to be that flamboyant. But hopefully, maybe you're thinking of something that could be your star moment, the thing that people will really remember. Maybe it's a unique slogan or phrase that you come up with. Maybe it's a unique comparison. Maybe it's a unique anecdote or metaphor. Okay, but hopefully, there's a moment in your presentation. All the stuff in your presentation should be awesome, but hopefully, maybe there's one moment that really shines, something that your audience won't forget, and that's what star moment is. Something they'll always remember. Okay, so just so you know, real quickly. I just have one final reminder, and then we are done. Let me close. Let me get the doofus off the page. You do have another discussion board activity, inspirational presenters. It's kind of similar to the week 1 activity. You're going to look at another presentation and essentially sort of critique it, but here you get to choose. So let me make this a little bit bigger. For this discussion, you will explore the presentation style of your industry role model. If you don't have someone in mind, or if the person you have in mind has never given speeches that are accessible online, you'll just have to find someone who inspires you. Let me just say something about that, because a lot of people get disappointed. They want to look up Jay-Z, or they want to look up, I don't know, Taylor Swift, or Killer Mike, or what's that guy? Skrillex's real name, Sonny Moore, or they want to look up their favorite indie artist, or right. And then what happens? They've never given a professional presentation or speech. So yeah, I'd say that here the challenge is to find someone useful. Okay, your favorite role model maybe hasn't given a presentation or a speech, but if you do general searches, Google searches, YouTube searches, you might find people who have given presentations on issues related to hip hop or on issues related to video games. Or okay, so you can be pretty generous with the idea of role model. If your actual role model hasn't given a presentation, you can hopefully find something that sort of fits the mold. And yes, if you're really struggling, you can go back to the TED Talks and find a different TED Talk to talk about than you did in week 1. Okay. So it's pretty similar to the week 1 assignment, and I apologize if it seems a little bit too familiar. But the goal here is that you have the opportunity to choose something of your liking rather than just choosing a TED Talk. But if you're struggling, feel free to go ahead and choose a TED Talk. Hopefully you use the search function in TED Talk. There are actually a lot of different topics covered. Okay, even if they're delivered by people you've never heard of. And then you get the instructions. Okay, so you're going to post a link to that video that you found. You're going to share a brief explanation of why they are inspirational. You're going to discuss their presentation style and techniques, what made them effective. Okay. So again, kind of like week one, as long as you're sort of hitting these prompts, you should be fine. And you have to respond to at least two of your classmates' posts. Let me just mention something quickly. I saw a lot of people either weren't responding at all or were responding with just real quick one sentence, two sentence things. You do have that RISE model handout that covers how to effectively respond to another person. I don't really go over it in detail in the session because I think it's incredibly boring to do so. Again, you can read that on your own. I'm perfectly fine with people who just know how to respond intuitively without using the RISE model. But the goal is always to thoughtfully and somewhat in depth respond to two of your classmates in a way that encourages further conversation. Your specific classmate may not take you up on that offer, right? They come to the board, do their work, and then you never see them, hear from them again until the following week. But you should be doing your best to encourage conversation. For every person who's not interested in engaging in dialogue, there is always someone who gets excited when they see that their notification bell is lit up and someone's actually responded to them, and they'll take the time to write back. So that's what we're aiming for, not just real quick hits on the board, one sentence or good job, bro, or awesome job, or asking a generic question that you don't care about and the person you're speaking to doesn't care about. The idea here is to foster discussion. Okay. Questions. That's really everything I have to go over. Justin says has to be a different one. I assume you mean the presentation. If you're struggling to find someone, a role model or someone important in your industry, like I don't know why I keep you hip hop music. Okay, let's say you do a search for again Jay-Z, Killer Mike. Who else do I like right now? Azalea Banks. I like her. Um, you might find that they haven't delivered a presentation. Okay, lots of people don't do this. Okay, it takes a pretty skillful and talented person to get invited to something and to deliver a speech. If you can't find someone, then do the best job you can. If you can find something on YouTube or something through a general Google search, you might be surprised how much you can find by people who are in your industry. Maybe it's not your number one choice. Maybe it's not your true role model, but it still might be interesting. If you're absolutely struggling, yes, you can go back to the TED Talk area and choose a different presentation. But no, you can't just like redo your write up that you did in week one because you already did that. Justin says, do I need to edit it out and redo a new speaker? I really enjoyed one of my speakers from week one. Yeah, if you can find a different presentation from that same speaker, that's fine. But no, you can't just use the same presentation that you already critiqued in week one. Okay, those are good questions. Questions from anybody else? If you're comfortable with what we've went over and you don't have questions, you can feel free to leave and enjoy the rest of your evening. I'll hang out for just a few minutes to answer questions if people have them. Thanks so much for attending, and we're going to do this again next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.